Hello, my name is Peter Raymer, and today I want to talk to you about how to generate classes from data in Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain. So oftentimes we have external systems that have data that need to be sent into Microsoft Dynamics 365. We can do that a few different ways. There's data migration framework, there's data entities, there's OData. As part of OData, we might use custom services to send data, to make web calls into D365, run some X++ code on that data to either insert records, update, delete, maybe retrieve data, and send it back out. All of those are some great options, but with custom services, we do need to write some X++ classes so that we can ingest that data and then run some more X++ code on it. Usually you have to write those X++ classes by hand and make sure that it really matches the data that you're sending in. But fortunately, I want to show you a cool utility within Visual Studio that helps generate those classes from the data you're sending in. So let's get started. Before we kind of progress further along, I wanted to explain some different data formats that you might be sent. So one data format is a CSV format. And so it might look like this, where you've got two columns. Each row is on a new line, and it's separated by a comma. Sometimes you'll have tab separated data or a pipe between them. When you've got this type of data, I wrote another article, how to write X++ to read in this type of data. That's really great. This type of data is not actually what we're going to talk about today. There's a couple other types of data that we can receive that Visual Studio can help us with, and one is called JSON and one is called XML. So we've got a few different examples, and I'll bring them up right here. And so I'll go to W3 Schools, which is a great site to help you teach different coding languages as well as formats. And in here, we can compare some of the differences between JSON and XML, just in case you're not familiar. JSON looks like this, where it starts with a curly braces and it ends with a curly brace. You can identify what type of data you have. So in this case, we've got 3 employee records with a column name or a value name of first name, and then the value is John. And then again, the next value that's being sent is last name, and the value is Doe. And so we can see each one of these records are really simple. It's self-describing, which is really cool. It tells us what each piece of data is along with passing in that data. That's really nice. We don't necessarily get that from a CSV unless the headers are included, and really with CSV files, they're pretty flat. They can only they can't be that complex. Whereas this, we can have very complex data where there's nested pieces of data underneath. XML is very similar. You can see an example right here. We've got employees. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit more. And then we've got each employee with their piece of data underneath. One of the downsides of XML is it just requires more text than JSON does. You can see we've got an opening tag and a closing tag for each one of these pieces of information, whereas with JSON we don't have that. We've just got the name and then the value right afterwards. So JSON is actually maybe a little bit more popular now because it can be transmitted faster because it's less characters without losing any of the describing information about those values. So we're going to look at how do we generate some classes based on a JSON example or an XML example, and then use that in D365 X++ to give us a really good head start in writing custom services. So let's jump right in. Let's pretend for a moment that we've got an example JSON that's extremely simple, like this one right here. We've got a request, and then we've got one property called data area ID, and then we've got a value of USRT. So this may not be super exciting at first, but I think it'll explain the point. So first thing we need to do is we need to open up Visual Studio. I've got a cloud-hosted development box right here, and I've got it open with a few examples that we're going to go through. First, we need to create a new project. But what's a little different this time is we're not creating an X++ project. We're actually creating a C# project, because this functionality only works when generating classes for C# or Visual Studio, or sorry, Visual Basic. But once we do that, we'll see that it's pretty straightforward to translate that back into X++, and it does give us a good head start. So go up to File, New, then Project. And now instead of selecting Finance and Operations, you can actually just search for Console App. There's a few different projects we could create, but I'm going to just search for Console App. And then I'm going to select, in my case, the second one down, this Console App with C# right here. And it says .NET Framework and C# right there. So I'll click Next. I can give it a name, Console App 2. That sounds great. And then I'll say Create. I'm actually going to not create this one just so I can leave this open. Once we create this console application, we're going to have a program.cs file. You can just double click on it to open up this file. Then you can select all the data in here and actually delete it out. So we want to start with just an open code editor window of a C# file. That's really all we're looking for to make this work. So that's step one. Step two is we actually need to copy our JSON or XML example data into our clipboard. So I'm going to come in here, select it all. You can then right click and say copy, or you can push Control-C on your keyboard to copy that into your clipboard. It must be in your clipboard. Now I'm going to come back to my editor window, and then finally I can click Edit, and then I'm looking for this option right here called Paste Special, and this is really where the magic comes in. I can say Paste JSON as classes or Paste XML as classes. If you don't see this option, definitely make sure that you've copied that text into your clipboard and that you've got a C# editor window open. If you still don't see this option, it could be that you're missing a Visual Studio component, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. But before I do, I want to show you what this looks like. So now if I say Paste JSON as classes, I can see that it's actually generated the classes necessary to read this JSON code, or sorry, this JSON data for me. So I can see I've got a request class, and I've got a root object, which contains kind of my whole entire class underneath it. In the case of X++, we actually always start with kind of this request class, so I don't actually need this root object. I can delete that. But then once I have my request class, I can see data area right here is a string. It's set it up as a C# property for me. I can now have the system know how to read this data and store it in this type of class. That's really awesome. From here, I do need to translate this into some X++. But before we do that, let me show you how to install that missing component just in case you don't have it. So if you're not seeing the Edit, Paste, and Special in here and you've checked everything else, go to Windows Start at the bottom here, and then let me see. Go ahead and type Visual Studio Installer, and you'll see this option pop up right here. Go ahead and click on it. this is going to bring up our Visual Studio instance and show us what's installed here and allow us to add more languages, more components to our Visual Studio instance. In this case, I've run a recent cloud-hosted development environment that comes with Visual Studio 2019. From here, I can click this Modify button, and it's going to show me all of the other components that I could download from the internet and install. And really the key here when you're looking at this is you need to have one of 3 workloads installed in order to see that pay special. You've got to have either the ASP.NET and web development installed, the Azure development, or this .NET desktop development. You shouldn't need all 3, but if you install one of these, let's say you're running Visual Studio on your own machine, you would need one of these for that functionality, that paste special, to show up. Then once you click the checkbox, let's just say I clicked a new one, you can click this Modify button to add in that new functionality. In this case, I already have these 3 installed, and I am seeing the paste and special, so I'm all set. All right, so you saw I generated this C# code, but what if I needed to translate this into X++ for use in a custom service? Well, I've actually already done this, and I specifically picked that JSON so that you could match it up with another example and another article that I wrote previously. If you search on my website, dynamics365musings.com, you can find this website, Create a Custom Service in D365. And in this case, we actually did this exact example. We wrote by hand this code right here, which is X++ code, to be able to read in a request that would take in one value from a JSON string called data area ID. And then once we did that, we also wrote a response. And I gave you an example of how to generate all the steps needed to create a custom service. And then finally, we use Postman to send in this exact request. And then what's amazing is the system automatically knows how to translate this data and populate it into our X++ class. And then from there, we can act on it, whether that being reading data, updating data, deleting, inserting data. We've consumed this data. So just to put it in here so you can kind of see it side by side, this is our same class right here. The difference here is instead of just a C# property, we actually have a parm method, which works very similar. We also, for the point of running a custom service, we've got this attribute with square brackets that give the name and an attribute at the top of our class. We did rename our class. Instead of request, we called it something different. You can really do that for the parentmost class. That's totally fine. But again, this makes it a lot easier to generate this code. But with a simple example, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, it'd be easier to write this by hand than it would be to generate and translate it again. Well, what if we had a much more complex JSON or XML string? Would that be helpful? So let's look at that a quick moment. Got another example right here in my text box. I'll zoom out maybe just a little so you can see it some more. But essentially, we have a request. We still have our data area ID. We've got this header class with several pieces of information, a message, a sales order number, a customer account. But then inside of our header class, we've got an array of lines. So you can think of like a sales order header with sales order lines. And within sales order lines, we've actually got several different pieces of information in every single line and a bunch of lines. And this isn't even that complex, right? We've really just got 2 to 3 class objects within here. But if I copy this into my keyboard, into my clipboard by right-clicking, copy, or pushing Control-C, then I can come back here. I'm going to go ahead and delete out everything from this class just so we can do this again. I can then say Edit, paste special, paste JSON as classes, and voila, it has read in that data and it's created the classes we need. We really don't need this root object, so I'll get rid of it, but we can see we've got this parent request with our data area ID, our header class, our lines class as an array already done for us. We've got our header class with these C# properties and our lines class with these C# properties. Notice it even detected which of these are strings and which ones are integers. So really phenomenal. Now we would want to go back through, add in some attributes to make sure that our custom service works and turn these into parm methods, which again, I actually already did. So there's another article called Create a Complex Service in D365 that you can find on my website. Similar deal, I actually wrote these code by hand, these classes, whereas if I had used this functionality, it would have made it a lot faster. So you can see I've got a header class with parm methods. I know that might be a little small, but you can see this on my website. I've got a parm method for message, sales order, and customer number. And then I've also got a line class that lists out my sales quantity, item, etc. All of these different parm methods. So it's a lot of copy and paste, and then you can just replace the names. And then finally, I've got my request class that's going to contain my data area ID. And then the header itself, parm method, this attribute gets a little interesting, so I definitely recommend you copy this one. And then it's really this lines one that's a little bit more complex to handle the array. So that part we do have to write out. But it's really phenomenal to be able to start from this generation of the classes, make sure that the values are correct, a lot of the data types are correct, and then just do some translation for X++. So really much faster way to do some of these very common things. All right, well, I want to make a special shout out to my colleague James McKay, who first showed me this capability. This is definitely really helpful. This is all what computers are about, right? Making work easier. It's nice when we can use computers to make work easier for us developers as well. If you've got any other suggestions of articles or tutorials you want to see, please keep posting in the comments. Those are really helpful. Thank you so much, and hopefully you learned something new today. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.